As Darius eased his pickup into the gravel lot beside Earl's diner, he took in the scene, an aging roadside eatery clinging to life along Route 66. It was the kind of place where the clock barely ticked, and unfamiliar faces weren't exactly met with warmth. The neon open sign gave off a weak hum from behind the dusty window, its flicker just bright enough to prove the place was still running. Nearby, a forgotten gas station stood abandoned, its fuel pumps rusting into the earth. Darius shut off the engine, took a breath, glanced at the building, then grabbed his cap and wallet. Inside, the diner looked exactly as expected: black, and white tile floors, cracked vinyl booths, and a silent jukebox that hadn't worked in years. The smell of old coffee and fried grease clung to the air like a lingering ghost. A weary-looking waitress wiped an already clean counter, mumbling something to the short-order cook behind her. When Darius stepped through the door, the bell overhead chimed, its sharp jangle turning heads that didn't turn back, no smiles, no friendly gestures, only stares, the kind you sense before you meet them, curious, wary, laced with something left unsaid. In the far corner, a pack of bikers lounged at a table, decked out in leather and shaded glasses despite the diner's dim glow. Their rowdy laughter fell dead quiet the second Darius crossed the threshold. He adjusted his cap, kept a loose posture, and made his way to a booth by the window, facing exits. It was a habit he couldn't shake. The waitress made her way over, pen tapping nervously on her notepad. "What can I get you?" she asked, voice flat. "Cheeseburger and fries." Darius said, calm, "Coffee, black." She scribbled the order without making eye contact, her gaze flicking toward the bikers, who were now eyeing Darius like a predator studies its target. But Darius didn't flinch. He sat still, collected, fingertips slowly circling the rim of his cup, as though the rest of the room faded away. But the room was there, alive and shifting. One of the bikers, a big man with a bushy beard and tattooed knuckles, leaned back in his seat. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Well, would you look at that, seems we got ourselves a tourist." The rest chuckled, low, rough, and full of warning. Darius didn't acknowledge him, but the man with the beard wasn't finished. "Hey, buddy, what's the problem? You deaf or just plain disrespectful?" The waitress came back with Darius's coffee, her hand slightly shaky as she set the cup on the table. Darius gave her a small smile and murmured a gentle thanks. This wasn't her battle, and she had no reason to carry guilt for stepping away. So she did, quickly. Darius lifted the cup and took a sip. He didn't have to glance up to know every gaze was fixed on him. Without saying a single word, he had become the center of the room's quiet divide. Outside, a truck rolled by, tires crunching over the gravel. Inside, the atmosphere thickened, like the eerie stillness before a storm rolls in. Darius knew the silence wouldn't hold much longer. Tension clung to the air, like breath held too long. The bikers had dropped all pretense, their focus honed in on Darius. They waited for a response he didn't plan to give. Maybe he's just shy. The bearded man sneered, lips curling into a smug, mocking grin. Or maybe he's lost. Not a lot of room for folks like him round here. That pushed it over. A harsh, cutting laugh spread through the group, crashing like surf on stone. The diner wasn't large, but moments like this made it feel unbearably close. Darius took another measured sip of coffee, still unfazed. No reaction. He didn't blink, didn't flinch if anything. He seemed indifferent. That quiet, composed demeanor only made them more agitated. The scrape of a chair against tile rang out sharply as the bearded man stood. His boots hit the floor with weight as he made his way toward Darius, every step loaded with intention. The others leaned back in their seats, ready for some action. Behind the counter, the waitress remained still, frozen, her eyes darting between Darius and the approaching man. Beardman stopped at the edge of the booth, so close Darius could smell sweat and stale smoke wafting from the man's vest. "Hey, I'm talking to you, boy." The word cut the air like a slap, hard, bitter, and pointed. Darius didn't react. Instead, he calmly placed his cup onto its saucer. "Is there something you need?" he asked at last. His voice was steady, composed, not challenging. If anything, it sounded courteous. But the careful, controlled tone gave the biker pause. The bearded man squinted. "You're sit in some place you shouldn't be. You don't know how things are done around here, do you?" Behind him, the rest of the bikers let out quiet laughs. One of them, a wiry guy with greasy, unkempt hair, called out, "Show him how it's done, Travis. Teach the guy some manners." Travis, it suited someone itching to assert dominance. Darius released a subtle breath, barely visible, but it was there. "I'm only here to eat," he said. That composure made Travis snap. He wanted provocation, a reason to unleash what was building. He slammed his fist onto the tabletop, causing the salt shaker to jump. "I don't think you heard me, pal." Darius slowly lifted his eyes, locking them onto Travis. And in that instant, something changed. There was no anger in Darius's stare, but no fear either. No, what Travis met was pure stillness. Unshakable, rooted, and though Travis tried not to show it, it made him uneasy. A pause, step back. Darius said in a low voice, it wasn't a warning, not a request, just a statement. Travis scoffed, masking unease with attitude. Or what? The entire diner went quiet again. Every movement froze. Even the cook stopped mid-flip. Travis's temper broke. "You're gonna learn some respect today." He lunged forward, hand reaching for Darius's collar. But Darius moved, fast and precise, snatching Travis's wrist before it landed. His grip locked like steel. Travis froze, caught off guard. "Don't," Darius murmured, his voice calm but edged with warning. Travis hesitated, unsure. His crew watched him now, silently pushing him to continue. With a sharp jerk, he yanked his arm back, stumbling a step in retreat, growling to cover the moment. "Think you're tough," he spat, shaking his hand out. "We'll see about that." He turned to his group. "Let's go." Chairs scraped the floor, tension rising like smoke. One by one, the rest, 5 in all, stood, grinning as they cracked their knuckles and loosened their shoulders. Darius remained seated, watching them with unshaken calm. No panic, no rage, just an unnerving quiet that didn't belong in a moment like this. The waitress, hands shaking, grabbed the phone behind the counter. "Don't," she began, but Travis cut her off with a sharp glare. "Put it down," he snapped. She froze, pulling back, powerless. Travis turned back toward Darius. "You've got 2 options. Buddy, walk out that door right now, or we settle this outside." Darius remained completely still, his eyes steady, expression unchanged. He gently lowered his coffee cup, the soft clink barely audible. "I'd prefer to finish my meal," he said calmly. Travis smirked, convinced he'd won. "Fine, then we'll handle it right here." The bikers closed in, positioning themselves in a semicircle around the booth. They believed they had him cornered, sure that their numbers gave them the upper hand. They were about to realize just how mistaken they were. The diner had turned into a theater, every customer now an unwilling observer. Nobody shifted, no one made a sound. Even the usual clatter of silverware had gone quiet. The bikers loomed closer, casting long shadows over Darius like a threat. Travis, hungry to reclaim his dominance, cracked his knuckles and sneered. "Last warning, tough guy. Leave now, or we knock you down." Darius didn't break eye contact, didn't so much as twitch. His body remained relaxed, borderline indifferent, and that only fueled Travis's rage. "You really don't get it," Travis growled. Then, suddenly, he lunged. To everyone else, time slowed, but for Darius, it was as natural as breathing. His movements were smooth, no panic, no hesitation, just trained precision. He slipped out of the booth in one seamless motion, caught Travis's swinging wrist, and redirected the force with ease. Travis stumbled, thrown off balance, and before he could recover, Darius twisted his arm behind him and slammed him into the table. The loud thud echoed across the room as Travis's chest met the hard laminate. One down, the rest froze, caught off guard. Darius let go, allowing Travis to drop to the floor, groaning. He faced the remaining bikers, his expression composed but firm. "You don't want this," he said, almost like he was offering them a favor. But backing down isn't something bikers do not with a crowd watching. The wiry one with greasy hair came next, charging with a yell and flailing fists. Darius moved aside, fluid like water sliding past stone, then drove an elbow into the man's gut. The biker doubled over, gasping, and Darius used his momentum to send him crashing into a chair. 2 down. The last 3 bikers stepped forward as one, only now understanding that this wasn't some random brawl. This was something else entirely, and panic began to seep through their confidence. But it was already too late. The biggest of the group reached for Darius's shoulder, a costly error. Darius spun swiftly, trapping the biker's arm and sweeping him off his feet in one smooth motion. Before the man could recover, Darius dropped to one knee, pressing it into the biker's back, and whispered, "Stay down." The biker froze, wheezing for breath, and didn't move. 3 down. Another attacker came rushing in from behind, swinging a chair in a clumsy, frantic motion. It lacked focus, born of panic. Darius ducked with ease, rose, and grabbed the chair mid-swing, ripping it from the biker's hands. Thrown off balance, the man staggered backward, and Darius stepped forward to close the gap. A controlled shove sent him crashing into a booth, where he crumpled, groaning. 4 down. The last man stood frozen in place, his eyes wide, hands shaking. He scanned the scene, his friends bruised, battered, and embarrassed. Then he turned to Darius, who looked as calm as ever, not even winded. Darius gave a small tilt of his head, a silent message. "You finished." The biker gulped, turned, and sprinted for the door. The bell clanged violently above him as he rushed out into the parking lot. 5 down, the diner fell silent once more. Darius exhaled, adjusted his cap, and surveyed the wreckage. The bikers groaned on the ground, too dazed or stunned to get up. Travis, still slumped over a table, lifted his head with a dazed mix of pain and disbelief. Darius met his gaze and spoke quietly. "I told you to back off." The stillness that followed was louder than the chaos before, but it wouldn't be the scuffle people remembered most. It would be everything that came afterward. The entire diner remained frozen. No one moved. The quiet hung thicker than before, almost like the room was holding its breath. Behind the counter, the waitress still clutched the phone, never having the chance to dial. The cook leaned through the pass window, his eyes wide with shock, spatula dangling limply from one hand. Darius stood upright again, breathing evenly, posture loose and casual. If someone had walked in just then, they'd think he had only bent down to tie his shoe. Travis groaned as he tried to lift himself halfway up, his pride far more wounded than his ribs. "What the hell? Who are you?" he asked, voice low and stunned. Darius looked down at him, his expression calm, unreadable. There was no gloating, no triumph, just quiet stillness. "Just a guy trying to eat." He replied softly. Travis squinted at him through reddened eyes. "You ain't right." "What are you, man?" Darius took a slow look around the diner. The faces watching him weren't afraid, they were awestruck, full of quiet respect. People didn't often witness that kind of composure, that level of control. He let out a small sigh, shaking his head. "You don't really want to know." The wiry biker, still slouched against a nearby chair, let out a raspy cough. "You ex-military or something?" Darius didn't reply. He turned his back to them and made his way to the booth he'd left behind. His plate was right where he left it, burger and fries untouched, coffee still half full. He picked up a fry, took a bite, and chewed like nothing unusual had just occurred. That was when the waitress finally stepped forward, moving carefully, her voice uncertain. "Sir, are you all right?" Darius glanced up and gave her a warm, quiet smile. "I'm just fine, ma'am." She blinked at his politeness, thrown off by the contrast between his manners and the scene that had just unfolded. She looked from him to the bikers groaning on the ground, then back again. "I'll get you a fresh burger," she offered. "No need," Darius replied calmly. "This one's just fine." From a corner booth, an older man with weathered skin and farmer's hands muttered, "Never seen nothing like that in my life." Darius paid no mind to the murmurs growing around him. He understood what they were thinking. A man who stays calm in a loud, chaotic world doesn't just stand out. He's remembered. He reached into his pocket, pulled out some cash, and tucked the bills neatly under the edge of his plate. Then he stood up. The only sound was the steady rhythm of his boots as he made his way toward the exit. The waitress called after him, "Wait, who are you really?" Darius paused with one hand on the door, turned back just slightly, and met her eyes for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. "Just a guy who likes to finish his meal," he said with a soft grin. Then he pushed the door open, the bell above giving a gentle chime as it shut behind him. Outside, gravel shifted under his boots as he walked across the lot to his truck. The biker who had run off earlier stood frozen by his motorcycle, staring in disbelief. He didn't say a thing, just stepped aside as Darius climbed into the truck. The engine started up with a roar, breaking the eerie stillness that had settled over the parking lot. Darius shifted the truck into drive, cast a brief glance in the rear-view mirror at the diner behind him, the figures inside still peering through the windows. Watching him disappear, then steered the vehicle onto the quiet stretch of road. The bikers would get back on their feet. Their bruises would eventually fade, but the memory wouldn't. You can't measure a man by his appearance, his accent, or where he came from. Sometimes it's the quiet ones you should never underestimate. For those still inside Earl's diner, this wasn't an ending, it was only the beginning. That little roadside stop on Route 66 would never feel quite the same again. Word traveled fast. This was the kind of tale people couldn't wait to share with neighbors, co-workers, and relatives. "I saw it with my own eyes," someone would claim. "He didn't even try. Just dismantled those bikers like he was brushing lint off his shirt. He never looked shaken." Another would chime in, like they weren't even worth his attention. The waitress had her version, too. She'd describe him with wide eyes, speaking about how still he stood, how deliberate every movement was. "I asked who he was," she'd recount, "and you know what he told me. Said he was just a guy trying to eat lunch." The bikers, on the other hand, learned a much harder truth. Their bruises healed fast enough, but the shame stayed longer. Travis, the loudmouth of the crew, barely spoke for weeks. Anytime someone cracked a joke about the diner, his face would flush red, and he'd mutter, "Drop it." But deep down, he couldn't drop it. None of them could. That day cracked open their pride and reminded them that power wasn't about backing each other up or talking the loudest. Real strength was restraint, the kind that acts only when it has to. As for Darius, he didn't care for the rumors or the legend being spun. He didn't need credit or praise. To him, it was simple. You treat people right, and you stay in your lane. But if someone steps too far, you respond not out of fury, but with control. Farther down that endless road Darius kept driving. The highway whispered beneath his tires, the sun sinking slow behind the hills. The diner, the men, the fight. They were behind him now. What filled his mind were flashes of his time as a Navy SEAL, missions no one knew. Faces he'd saved without them ever realizing. That was what mattered. Not fame, not pride. Just doing what needed to be done. And so, he kept going. A soft melody drifted from the old radio, the kind of tune that made the highway feel infinite and wide open. A few miles down the road, Darius pulled into a quiet roadside stop, this time a gas station. He stepped out, stretched his legs, and headed inside for a bottle of water. Behind the counter stood a teenage clerk with headphones hanging loosely around his neck. He glanced up as Darius approached. "On your way somewhere special?" he asked, just making small talk. Darius gave a faint smile and placed a few bills on the counter. "Not really, just passing through." The kid nodded, his gaze lingering as he noticed something about the way Darius carried himself. "You in the military or something?" Darius hesitated briefly, then offered a slight shrug. "Just a guy getting some water." He walked back out, bottle in hand, climbed into his truck, and pulled back onto the highway. From the window, the kid watched him drive away, feeling something he couldn't quite name: respect, maybe, or wonder. And just like that, Darius was gone again. Another place behind him, another ribbon of road ahead. He wasn't looking for credit. He didn't crave attention. But the impression he left lingered, a quiet strength that spoke louder than any words ever could. You don't have to raise your voice to be powerful. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Often, the strongest people are those who let their actions speak. True respect isn't earned through intimidation or empty bravado. It comes from control, from calmness, from steady strength. The people who appear the most composed are usually the ones who have survived the fiercest storms. So don't be too quick to judge. If this story struck a chord with you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. And be sure to subscribe for more stories that speak to what really matters.